CPI in October higher than in September, but it's a nominal increase, but nonetheless way outside the target band for inflation. Is it a worrying picture?
No, not particularly. I mean, the slight increase was actually expected. And part of it's just a base effect because this time last year there were some very low monthly increases, and they're just coming in a bit bigger this year. So it's not a big surprise. We've got we've got pressure from fuel prices like everybody else. So I think it's, as I say, not a big surprise, and it's largely being driven by fuel prices and power prices, electricity.
Obviously, given the impact that the global recession had on Botswana, the Bank of Botswana has a tacit growth mandate, and they are intent on stimulating the economy at the moment. Are we seeing that happening? Because at the last MPC, they decided to keep rates unchanged at 9.5%. Will we continue to see this reticence on their part?
I think so. I think they've very clearly indicated that they're being driven by their medium-term inflation forecasts and not by short-term changes in inflation. So I don't think that we'll see any change at the next MPC meeting in response to this slight increase in inflation.
In the medium term, the Bank of Botswana expects inflation to come down well within the target range of 3 to 6%. But when you talk about rising utility costs, rising fuel and transport costs, is it a realistic outlook?
I think so. I mean, this is looking in the medium term, so we're talking about looking 18 to 24 months ahead, and hopefully that those fuel and electricity increases will then have passed through the inflation calculation. So I think that there is a reasonable chance that within 18 months, they may not be well within the range, but I think they will be below the 6% upper end of the range.
What's the broader impact of rising inflation on the economy?
Its main impact is on real wages, because for many people, wages have not been keeping up with inflation. So there's a squeeze on many households, and that obviously affects spending power, spending patterns, and savings. So I think that's really the main problem, is the effect on living standards.
And what does it mean for investors wanting to come into Botswana? Because you've also got a pula, which has depreciated about 12% to the dollar this year alone.
Yeah, it's depreciated against the dollar, but of course it's risen against the rand. So because of the way the pula basket exchange rate mechanism works, so actually the pula overall is on a gradual crawling peg, which means that the overall value is down by a much smaller amount because the increase against the rand offsets the depreciation against the dollar. So the pula is actually fairly stable against the overall balance, a trade-weighted basket.
Okay, let's talk about the macro picture for the economy. Inflation is obviously a variable, growth another variable. The economy has started to recover from what we saw 2 years ago, but you've still got a wide deficit expected to remain fairly big. The government still expected to spend too much. Does that bode well for Botswana?
Well, I think the growth forecasts are reasonable, and what we're still seeing is recovery in the diamond sector, which is the largest, obviously, and that's still recovering from the big contraction we saw a couple of years ago. So that's keeping overall growth rates up simply through recovery in the diamond sector. But on the deficit side, I think that the actual numbers will come in quite a lot smaller than the forecasts, because certainly through the middle of this year, with very buoyant diamond sales, actually government revenues have been ahead of budget. So I think that the actual outturns on the deficit will be considerably smaller than the numbers that were being talked about at the budget back in February.
Still on the macro front, for investors doing a comparative assessment of whether to bring their money into South Africa, Namibia, Botswana, Nigeria, how would you rate Botswana?
Well, I think it's very stable. It's got high underlying, it's had steady underlying growth rates. Obviously, if you're looking at a big domestic market, then somewhere like Nigeria or South Africa would be of much more interest. I mean, the Botswana, like Namibia, domestic market is very small, and it makes sense to use it as a base for export production. Compared to Namibia, Namibia is a bit more diversified. That helps. But I think depending on the industry, particularly if you're looking at mining, Botswana really has the best mining governance and infrastructure of any of those countries.